What's shaping up to be the year's biggest storm, barreling straight toward 100 million of us tonight, hitting everywhere, including parts of the country that never get snow like this. We're live on the ground and with Al Roker on what we expect to see next. Back here in Washington, President Biden's amping up the pressure on Russia, deploying 3,000 troops to Europe. And the Pentagon press secretary telling me they're not ruling out sending more. We've got those details in a minute. Plus, the stunner of a resignation today from the now ex-head of CNN because of a consensual relationship, apparently with another top exec, why the business world is asking a lot of questions about what this means for their major merger. And new TikTok rules may be on the way. What that means for your scrolling habit, you'll want to listen to that one. Plus, nearly 2 years into the pandemic, restaurants still struggling with Omicron only making it worse. But does Congress care? Some owners don't think so. We'll explain why in tonight's original later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and as we're coming on the air tonight, you've got this wicked winter storm smashing its way across the country in what could be the biggest storm of the season. More than 100 million people are under those winter weather alerts tonight, from Maine to New Mexico. The Midwest just buried. Dangerous freezing rain expected from Texas to Vermont. Missouri's even activating the National Guard now to help out. And of course, all of this is making travel practically impossible. Thousands of flights have been canceled tomorrow. That makes it one of the worst days for flying in the last year. Millions more people are being told, do not drive, get off the roads. And then some stores like Walmart in the Midwest are even closing their doors ahead of this whole thing. Al Roker is tracking it for us tonight. But first, let's get to Shaquille Brewster in Detroit. Okay, Shaq. You in a hat and a thick coat is kind of how I'm used to seeing you these days. Give us the deal. What's happening where you are?
I know this seems like my normal go-to, being outside in the cold, but today we're talking about this massive storm. And you know, Hallie, I'll just let you see what we're going through in Detroit. Just take a look at the dog park over there. I just wanted an excuse to talk about dogs, honestly, but they're having fun enjoying the snow that's out here. You know, one thing that we saw here in Detroit is that this morning started out with rain and then it went to sleet, and finally they're getting the snow. Yesterday, forecasters were saying that this could be a top 10 snow event with up to 12 inches of snow. It looks like because the rain held on a little bit longer than they expected, it's not going to reach that amount, but this is a significant amount. Schools are going virtual already. There's that state of emergency in effect, so people are taking this extremely seriously, Hallie.
You would hope so, right, given what the forecast is. But the thing is, Shaq, you know, people in Detroit where you are, they're kind of used to this type of thing. It's going to hit a lot different down south.
They're used to, but I'll tell you, I talked to someone who was shoveling some snow, and he talked about this being heavier. It's denser. It's more than that. It's more than what they normally get to. I want you to listen to some of the conversations I had, not only here, but our teams in Chicago and other areas around the Midwest had with folks who, like you said, are typically used to stuff like this. Is this different?
Right here, yes.
How so?
All day. All day, you gotta keep up with it.
It's the hardship makes you feel alive. It's fun.
You're cold all the time, you're wet. It's just not fun.
I can identify a little bit with that last one there, but also different is how widespread this storm is. This is a storm that's impacting more than 105 million people across the country, as far as south as Texas, and you go up in New York, and folks on the East Coast are also going to have the impact here. So what we're seeing here, important to note, just round one. There's another wave that's going to come through later tonight. So those snow accumulations, those totals across the region are expected to rise fairly quickly, Hallie.
Shaq Brewster, thank you much, my friend. Stay warm. Let me get over to Al Roker, who's tracking this thing. And Al, part of what seems to make this storm so dangerous is how slowly it's moving. No?
Yeah, absolutely, Hallie.
Do not check your volume button on your device or your remote control if you're still using one of those archaic devices. We've lost Al Roker's microphone. We're going to get him back. We're going to have him explain what's happening with the weather situation. And if we don't, you know we'll be talking to him tomorrow. We're going to try to fix that. And sorry for the tech issue. But beyond weather, there's a bunch of other headlines that are making a lot of news tonight, including this from President Biden. He's explaining more here in Washington about his decision to send thousands of U.S. troops to Eastern Europe to, quote, deter aggression, telling reporters that it's totally consistent, his words, with what he's been telling Russian President Vladimir Putin from the jump, that as long as he's acting aggressively, NATO allies need to know the U.S. has their back. So here's the deal. 3,000 troops are now headed to the border, right, to the area around Ukraine, to Germany and Poland. You've got 1,000 that are already in Europe that are going to be deploying elsewhere, too. Notice, though, none of these forces are actually going into Ukraine. The administration says that is not happening, that they're not going to be fighting in Ukraine, even if Putin invades, because Ukraine is not in NATO. But when I talked with the Pentagon press secretary, John Kirby, not too long ago, just this afternoon, he was very clear that it's entirely possible the U.S. will beef up the military presence near Ukraine, even more than this. Watch. Could more U.S. troops deploy as part of this bolstered support to NATO in this round?
Yes, I think it's entirely possible. We're keeping that option on the table, that we could be deploying or repositioning inside Europe more forces like the ones that are going to Romania that are coming from Germany.
So remember, this is in addition, this is on top of the 8,500 troops here on heightened alert who are already all prepped and ready to go if they need to. Shannon Pettypiece is here with more. Shannon, we know that Russia has something like 130,000 troops, we think, massed along the Ukrainian border here. The U.S. is now trying to beef up the NATO presence, sending troops to the area. Talk to me about the administration's strategy and thinking here as it relates to trying to turn the temperature down or at least to send a message.
This is something the president and the administration has signaled for a while now that they could do. In addition to talking about the severe economic sanctions that they will put in place should Russia invade Ukraine or further carry out this aggression. They have been saying all along that there was a potential to send, military force, military support to the NATO allies. I think you make a really important point there, Hallie, that these troops are not being positioned there so they can move into Ukraine at a moment's notice should be necessary. That's not what we're talking about here. The administration says they're talking about this obligation they have under their NATO agreement, under this thing called Article 5, where if any NATO country is invaded, the U.S. as a member of NATO needs to come to their defense. So they're saying that these are being positioned to help the NATO allies, which raises this question: does the U.S. think some of these NATO allies could potentially get invaded? And the White House has kind of left the door open to that possibility because they say Russia is showing this aggression. So a sign of support to our NATO allies, a bit strategic, but also the administration has said something they hope to deter Putin from invading Ukraine, to show how serious the U.S. and its European allies are about wanting to see Putin stand down and pull back from the line here.
There's also a piece of this that I think is interesting, Shannon, which is the administration also not shutting the door on the possibility that these U.S. troops may end up going into Ukraine, possibly to help evacuate people if it were to come to that, right? If Russia were to invade, not to fight. It's a very different thing here, but that is not out of the realm of possibility. There's a lot of preparations for a lot of different scenarios that could lay out here.
Yeah, and contingencies. And that was something we heard the White House today talk about, wanting to have the capabilities in place for the various contingencies. We think about Afghanistan. There was some reporting today showing the administration wasn't prepared for all the contingencies that could unfold in Afghanistan. I know that what happened back in August weighs heavily in this White House when they think about foreign policy and planning. And so when it comes to contingency planning and all the different options, that's certainly something the administration is going to be weighing as well.
There's also been a bit of semantic backtracking or, front tracking, Shannon, because you heard White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki today get pressed on this idea that she's no longer calling this potential Russian invasion imminent, right? She said, well, I said it once last week. I haven't said it in a while. People around here haven't said it in a while. That's actually partly, as we know from our NBC News colleagues who are in Ukraine, Shannon, because Ukraine heard the word imminent and it translates to something more like inevitable, which nobody is really saying at this point. They hope, in fact, it's not inevitable.
Right. Well, a reminder here, too, in such a tense situation, how much the words people use matter and how everyone on every side is really parsing what each side is saying. And the White House tried to make clear and tried to reiterate that they do think an invasion could happen at any moment, given the level of troops at the border, the preparations, the things the Russians are doing, like sending plasma to the border, something that would be needed in the eventual situation if there was a combat situation. But, there's also, too, they have admitted that the U.S. doesn't know what's going to happen here. And they do continue to say they don't know what Putin has decided, and that, of course, they're keeping this diplomatic process going. And you've got the Secretary of State and his counterpart in Russia continuing to talk. So they say the door is still open, too, on diplomacy, despite all this military talk we've had over the past 24 hours here.
It's been a lot. I know you'll stay on top of it. Shannon Pettypiece live outside the White House for us. Shannon, thank you. As promised, we worked on getting Al Roker back for you. I believe he is with us, and I believe we can actually hear the wisdom that he's able to drop.
I think so.
Perfect. Thanks, Al.
So.
Listen, we were.
I think it's revenge by Punxsutawney Phil because I made fun of him this morning. So
okay. Well, I'm sorry that he's taking aim at you. Talk to us about this storm. You were just getting into the issue that it's moving really slowly. That's the problem.
That's right. 105 million of us are under some sort of winter advisory, watch, warning, or ice storm warning. And in fact, that's just about almost 1 in 3 Americans are under some sort of winter weather advisory. You can see right now, look at this. We've got icing conditions going on down in Texas, Wichita Falls, Midland, just to the west of Dallas. In fact, ERCOT down there, the energy group, said, remember February of 2021, that massive ice storm? The gigawatt strain on the system was 77 gigawatts per hour. They expect it to be about 73 tonight. So they're getting close to that level. So hopefully the system holds. But you can also see rain and snow up through the Midwest. So slow mover, significant ice from Texas on into New York tomorrow. A band of heavy snow developing from Missouri on to Maine. Then Friday, slick commutes from Washington to Boston. Rain, snow, and a mix in between. Showers and storms soaking the southeast. And here's what we're looking for as far as a snowfall forecast. Joplin, Missouri, 5 to 8 inches. But look at Dallas. Could get 1 to 3 inches of snow. Louisville, about 2. Columbus, 6 to 10. Chicago, 5 to 10. Where Shaq Brewster was in Detroit, they could end up with a foot of snow before it's all over. Cleveland, 10 inches. 8 to 12 in Burlington and Bangor. Boston right now looks to be on the light side, 1 to 2 inches. But airport delays possible for Boston, Burlington as well. Buffalo and Cleveland for snow and wind. The roads, I-95 and I-90 are going to be a bit of a mess. And then as we slide along the system, Chicago to Louisville going to be a bit of a problem. I-65, St. Louis to Columbus going to be problems. And look for airport delays, Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. And of course, the ice, Hallie, is going to be really rough from Dallas into central Texas and all the way to upstate New York. We are talking about 1/10 of an inch to a 1/2 inch. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but up to 1/4 of an inch, you've got slick roads, bridges, travel is hazardous, and icy glaze forms on trees. 1/4 to 1/2 inch, those limbs break, causing power outages, dangerous road conditions. When you get to 1/2 inch to an inch, impassable roads, widespread multi-day power outages, Hallie. So this, we are looking at a very high impact storm, not just from snow, but what we're really worried about is the icing
right,
that stretches over 2,000 miles.
Yeah, it's sort of this huge scale that we're looking at here, especially for people who aren't used to seeing that. Al Roker, thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. I'm sure we'll hear more from you about this over the next 24, 48 hours. We're learning more tonight about the potential causes of this mysterious brain injury situation, right? This mysterious sickness called the Havana syndrome. It's affected a small group of American diplomats and spies overseas. And now, in a new report that just came out, just within the last maybe 90 minutes or so, you've got this panel of experts working for U.S. intel agencies saying that the most likely cause is microwave energy from some kind of external source. They don't really know what that source is. The backdrop here, since late 2016, you've seen hundreds of U.S. officials in more than a dozen countries coming forward to report symptoms believed to be related to this Havana syndrome. But last month, the CIA came out and said, hey, most of these people don't actually fit the profile. A couple dozen do. That's where the mystery is. And that's what this new report is hoping to shine a light on. Ken Delaney is following the story for us. So, Ken, break this down a little bit, right? Because we're now centering on those, I think, a couple dozen diplomats, most of them related to the initial incident reporting in 2016. They get these really weird symptoms. We don't know what it is. And now these experts are saying it's probably microwave energy, which is the clearest sign yet, right? The most definitive evidence yet or answer yet that we have for this.
Yeah, you nailed it, Hallie. It's a little bit confusing because we've been reporting for 3 years now about hundreds of diplomats coming forward and saying they believe they have these symptoms that could be Havana syndrome. And then last month, the CIA comes out with his interim assessment that says most of those people do not fit the profile. They found alternate explanations. And it kind of poured cold water on the whole idea. But if you read it carefully, it said, hey, there are about 24 cases where we can't rule out foreign involvement. We have no idea what caused it. And those are the cases, it looks like, that this panel of experts studied very closely. And this was a panel of outside experts, scientists, technologists, and U.S. intelligence officials. And they had access to classified information. They interviewed victims. They interviewed experts. And what they concluded was the most plausible explanation is directed energy from an external source. Now, they didn't identify, as you said, they didn't identify a device. And they weren't even looking at the question of who might be responsible. But just by concluding that, hey, this is likely directed energy, they have bolstered the long-standing hypothesis by the intelligence community that this is likely the Russians, because the Russians have a history of studying this technology. Now, the problem with that, Hallie, is they've been looking for years, the spies have, and they've not come up with any evidence to point to Russia, even though CIA Director William Burns went to Moscow and warned the Russians that if they were doing this, there would be consequences. It's a real mystery. But this report does move the ball forward in the sense of saying, look, we think these symptoms are not explained by any other phenomenon. They're not psychosomatic.
Right.
People are not making this up. They were hit by some kind of energy, and it caused real damage to them. What they have not said, though, is if this is still going on, Hallie.
You make a good point, Cam, because in the beginning, I think there was some sense, especially in interviews that I know you and our colleagues have done talking to these folks who've been affected, that like, oh, it's all in your head. Oh, you're making it up, right? This goes a step beyond that to say, no, this is what we think happened. This is what we think caused it. And we're hearing now from, I think, some of the country's top intel officials, right? The CIA director, the National Intelligence Director.
Yeah, that's right. Now, those leaders of these agencies have to walk a fine line because they want to, project the idea that they care about their workforce, even those people who have symptoms but don't fit the profile, because this has become an all-consuming phenomenon. CIA people are turning down jobs overseas because they're concerned that they're going to be hit with some kind of microwave ray, and that's in part why the CIA released that assessment last month. They wanted to communicate, hey, there is no global campaign that we know of foreign spies hiding in the street corner trying to aim a ray at you, but there is this unexplained phenomenon. Something happened to these people. They were, one day they were healthy, the next day they were floored, and some of them have never been the same since. And now we know that the most likely cause was some kind of external energy, and now they need to solve the mystery of how did that happen, Hallie?
Ken Delaney, way to stay on top of the story. We so appreciate you bringing us the latest developments. Thank you. Want to get over now to where the clock is ticking for former President Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump, as it relates to the January 6th committee. She was apparently supposed to meet with those congressional investigators tomorrow or Friday, but committee chair Congressman Benny Thompson is now saying he doesn't know if she's actually going to show up. Watch.
So do you expect her to appear?
Well,
plans for her to appear?
Well, we don't know. We make preparations, but sometimes things slide another day or another week.
But we
would like to talk with her.
Okay, so leaving the door open. Maybe at some point they will actually talk with her. It comes as we know that the committee may get its hands on something else related to the man that you see on your screen right now, former Vice President Mike Pence, because today we learned the National Archives sent a letter to former President Trump letting him know that by March 3rd, early March, documents from Pence related to the Trump White House will be turned over to that January 6th select committee. The only catch, the only caveat, if Team Trump decides to get out there and block it. I want to get to Leanne Caldwell on Capitol Hill. And Leanne, we have seen this movie before as it relates to documents from the National Archives that the Select Committee wants to see. They want to see these documents from Mike Pence and his time in the Trump White House, right? They think that it could actually provide more information about what happened on the days leading up to and on January 6th. It's entirely possible, though, that Team Trump could come out and say, no, we have a legal objection. But that hasn't worked for him before. Why would this time be different?
Yeah, we don't know that it will be different, and people don't think that it will be different, Hallie. And so the fact if there is a legal challenge, we've seen this process play out before, as you indicated. And so the question now, is there actually going to be that challenge from the Trump team? What's interesting in these documents, we don't know exactly what they are going to be, but in a letter from the White House to the National Archives where they said that they would allow these documents to be released, that they give some sort of hint on what what is in these documents, and it is communications concerning the former vice president's responsibilities as president of the Senate and certifying the vote of presidential electors on January 6, 2021. And so these documents, we don't necessarily know how many, but could be very important for the committee's investigation, Hallie.
There's also this piece of it as it relates to Ivanka Trump, as it relates to former Attorney General Bill Barr, too. We heard from Chairman Thompson that they have no reason to believe he would not cooperate, right? Talk about Ivanka Trump specifically, because she is somebody who it sounds like the chairman's leaving the door open to hearing from sometime maybe in the next week, couple weeks. She could be, and is a really high-profile figure in this.
Absolutely. When the committee sent Ivanka Trump a letter requesting, not subpoenaing, but requesting her cooperation, they requested it by February 3rd or 4th. That is tomorrow or the next day. What Chairman Thompson said is sometimes he's seen slip a couple days or maybe a week or so. But what he did not say is that she has indicated that she is not showing up. And so Ivanka Trump coming to talk to the committee or talking to the committee remotely would be a huge deal. She was not only, as you know, the top advisor to the former president, but she's the former president's daughter. And so that would be really, really, it would be fascinating to see if she actually showed up to talk to this committee, Hallie.
Somebody who did show up to talk to the committee is Jeffrey Clark, right? The former DOJ official who became kind of infamous for backing these debunked election conspiracy theories. We're seeing some video of him now walking out of his conversation with the Select Committee. Here's what we don't know, Leanne. We don't know what he said. We don't know if he cooperated, how much he cooperated, if anything he said was useful, if he just said, I had a ham and cheese sandwich for lunch. We don't know that piece of it. We know he spent about 90 minutes there. And he could be somebody else that's critical for the committee to get information from.
Yeah, critical because he was like the Trump person in the Department of Justice who was working inside the Department of Justice to try to say that the election was overturned or needed to be overturned or fraudulent or there was something wrong with it. He was trying to also get placed as Attorney General at the time to move forward with this plan. So, yeah, he is critical. And at first, if we back up, he said he was not going to cooperate with the committee. And then the committee held him in contempt. And then Jeffrey Clark said, oh, OK, wait a minute, I will cooperate with the committee, even though his attorney had indicated that he would probably plead the fifth. Well, now he has finally appeared before the committee. We don't know what happened behind those closed doors, but he is definitely someone that the committee thinks is critical in their investigation, Hallie.
Leanne Caldwell, live on the Hill. Thank you very much. Coming up, CNN President Jeff Zucker resigning because he did not disclose his consensual relationship with a colleague. We've got more details on how the network's responding, what's next for leadership and the broader business world in just a minute. The Justice Department could pursue criminal charges against states involved in that whole fake electors scandal. That's when these so-called alternate electors in 7 states submitted what they said were electoral college votes for Donald Trump. They weren't, but the whole thing was this push to overturn the legitimate 2020 election results. These are the 7 states in question where President Joe Biden actually won the popular vote. But because Biden won the popular vote in those winner-take-all states, only electoral votes for him could be officially submitted and counted. The January 6th committee, for their part, has already subpoenaed 14 people involved in this whole thing from those states. I want to bring in Pete Williams. And Pete, experts that you spoke with say the Department of Justice could pursue criminal charges, maybe even conspiracy charges. Talk about the crime piece of this here, right? What they think actually crossed the line and broke the law.
So this is if the evidence supports these allegations, of course. The first possibility is sort of at a low level, a false statement, because in each of these cases, although there is an asterisk on this, but in these cases, the electors all signed and said, we are the duly chosen electors. Well, they weren't. If their states lost, if Trump lost the popular vote in their states, they weren't duly authorized electors. They had no authority to cast an electoral vote for Trump, because under the law of each of those states, only the person who won the popular vote was entitled to the electoral votes. Secondly, they say they met in the state capitals. Some of them showed up at state capitals and were turned away. Now, the asterisk was in 2 of those states, New Mexico and Pennsylvania, what they sent in actually said, we want you to count our votes if it turns out that Trump won the popular vote in our state.
So, Pete, you talk about if the evidence supports it, of course. When I think about evidence, I think about, do these certificates exist, these fakes? Where are they? Do we know where they are?
I should also say, to answer your question about conspiracy, those were the sort of low-level crimes. But the conspiracy possibility would be if there was, in fact, a plan to have all these states do this, then there could be a charge of conspiracy to defraud the federal government. I must say, it does appear that there was a plan because on the day that the electors met on December 14th of 2020, Stephen Miller a White House aide gave an interview on Fox News in which he talked about this very openly and said, we're doing this in case we win the lawsuits in any of these states, then we'll be, all dressed up and ready to go. In terms of where these things are, actually, that's a very good question. We don't know the answer to it. We know, or we're pretty confident, that, I'll say this, the law says that the electors are supposed to give copies of these to the Secretary of State in their state, to each of the electors, to the National Archives, and to the President of the Senate, who, as you know, is the Vice President. We believe Archives never did anything with them because we FOIA'd this at the time, and Archives said, yes, we have those things. They were sent in to us by private citizens. So apparently Archives didn't think much of them. The question is, what did Vice President Pence do with them? And we've never gotten an answer to that. We don't think that they ever made their way into those mahogany boxes on the floor of the House for the joint session to count the votes. We don't think he ever did anything with them.
Well, wait a second, Pete, because right before the break, we talked to Leanne about how the National Archives is releasing a trove of records from former Vice President Pence's time in the White House.
Right.
Could that not, in theory, potentially include these certificates?
Well, yes, it could include those or correspondence about them or notes or emails where he says, I'm not going to do anything with them. I'm hoping that they will contain an answer to that question because we've never been able to get one. It's been a bit of, if you'll pardon the expression, a black box about exactly what happened from the time these things came to Washington until where they finally ended up. We don't know where they finally ended up. But we don't believe Archives ever did anything with them except put them in a file.
Pete Williams, it's an interesting story. Thank you for keeping us honest about it. Appreciate it. So, have you heard about this? Warner Media announcing a team of interim leaders at CNN today, temporary leaders, basically, after the resignation of President Jeff Zucker. It is a stunner. We don't take that word lightly. We don't use that word lightly, but that's what we're hearing from people around that orbit here. He announced just today that he's resigning as the president of CNN. Why? Because Zucker says he did not properly disclose a romantic relationship, a consensual romantic relationship, he says, with another CNN senior executive. Apparently, questions about this relationship came up during the network's investigation into Chris Cuomo's conduct at CNN. Cuomo was fired in December for using his position to try to help his brother, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, fight sexual misconduct allegations. In a company-wide email, Zucker said, I acknowledge the relationship evolved in recent years. I was required to disclose it when it began, but I didn't. I was wrong. His email did not name who that relationship was with, but CNN reports it's the company's executive VP and chief marketing officer, Allison Gollust. Dylan Byers, senior correspondent at Puck, is joining me now. Dylan, it's great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Hallie. How are you?
So the business implications here, talk through those, because CNN was on the precipice of this big merger. Zucker was supposed to be the person to help bridge that gap here. Not to mention they're trying to push into streaming with a big new push, sometime in the next couple of months, we think. How does this move affect all of those other business pieces at play? And what are you hearing from folks in that world?
Yeah, I would say that the ramifications of this are pretty seismic, and I don't say that lightly, but all the alarm bell emojis you want to use apply here if you're in the media industry, and certainly if you're at CNN. And the reason for that is that the most important job that a leader of a cable news network has comes down to the relationships with the talent. And there was an almost filial-like loyalty to Jeff Zucker inside CNN among many of the bold-faced names who CNN viewers are familiar with. He is now out of a job all of a sudden, leaving the company, effectively rudderless because of how integral he was to every decision that was made at CNN. I mean, really right down to the chyron on the bottom of the screen. And at the same time, you are doing it just months ahead of a big merger that is going to unite Warner Media with Discovery. So you've got maybe not 5,000 CNN staffers, but you've got a hell of a lot of CNN staffers who are feeling pretty distraught and anxious about what this means, because for them, going to work at CNN was going to work for Jeff Zucker. You've got David Zaslav, the head of this new Warner Media Discovery media empire, who now has to figure out what to do with an effectively leaderless CNN. And in the meantime, I think just in terms of the sort of Shakespearean drama of it, you've got the downfall of a really outsized presence in the media community, and that changes what the cable news and television news landscape looks like generally.
You talked about how it is, in your words, an effectively leaderless company. They did name 3 people, right, who they're going to take over for now, the leadership of CNN in the interim. Could one of them be the ultimate successor, based on your reporting for Zucker down the road?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think what my reporting tells me is that people feel like all 3 of these people are not, look, they're great hands to have on the wheel to steady the ship amid this controversy. And they've all worked there for a long time. They all have their own relationships with the talent. But I don't think anyone sees in any of these 3 people the kind of person who could step in and fill Jeff Zucker's shoes. In fact, interestingly enough, the person that Jeff Zucker wanted to have fill his shoes was Alison Gollust. And Alison Gollust, based on my reporting, despite she's staying on at the network for the time being, but she's very likely to leave the network, I would say, within the next few weeks or months. So I think the question now for David Zaslav when he takes over CNN is, A, what do you want CNN to be? Do you want it to go back to its roots of being a sort of hard news thing and get away from some of this sort of resistance to the Trump administration programming that they had? And then B, the question is who can do that and who has the relationships with the talent? And I don't know if there's a good answer to that question yet. And we'll have to wait until after the merger in the spring of this year to see what he decides to do there.
Dylan Byers, thank you so much for being with us. It's a business story, right? It's a culture story. There's a lot there to it. One of the rare, as you say, one of the rare behind-the-scenes TV names who I think even casual viewers knew of and knew about, no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, an outsized presence and certainly someone who has made his stamp on the media industry and on American politics and culture generally.
Dylan Byers, thanks, man. Appreciate it. So that story that was breaking as we were on the air 24 hours ago, the former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores and his lawsuit against the NFL, that is still making headlines today. He's sharing more about his allegations of racial discrimination and his claims of some pretty shady practices by his former team. What he told our Gabe Gutierrez coming up. And that huge fertilizer plant fire we told you about still has a community on edge nearly 48 hours after it started. What we're now hearing about the chances for an explosion. That's coming up. Former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores, he's talking more about why he's suing the NFL, claiming racist hiring practices. Our Gabe Gutierrez talked with him one-on-one. He's going to join us in a second. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, we just heard about this in the last hour or so. Facebook shares down 20% after the closing bell. Why? The company just reported its earnings. They're a miss, below expectations. You've got the Facebook parent company, Meta, blaming inflation and supply chain issues. We're going to watch to see how this might move the markets tomorrow when they open. Number 2, still some concerns about this fertilizer plant that could explode in North Carolina because of this out-of-control fire. Remember, we showed you this yesterday. Thousands of people had to evacuate. Officials say there's a lot of smoke. The air quality is really bad because of this stuff burning. They're not sure when they're going to be able to get this fire under control. Number 3, the FBI says 6, we don't know their ages, kids, teens, minors, basically, in the country are people of interest in a series of bomb threats at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. More than a dozen of those HBCUs got threats this week. The minors apparently used tech-savvy ways to disguise where they were. Officials say the threats appear to be racially motivated. Number 4, 2 men have been arrested after a shooting at a Minnesota high school that killed one student and hurt another. It happened at the South Education Center in Richfield. Police say they're not looking for any other suspects. And number 5, you heard about this? ABC News has suspended Whoopi Goldberg for a couple weeks. She caught a ton of backlash this week after saying on The View the Holocaust was not about race. She apologized not too long after she said that. In a statement, the network's president called Goldberg's comments wrong and hurtful. Today, we're hearing more from Brian Flores, the former Miami Dolphins head coach who's suing the NFL for what he says is racial discrimination in hiring. And he's talking about how he feels humiliated, angry, in disbelief. And we want to show you why he's filing this lawsuit. It's these texts that he had with Bill Belichick, the Patriots coach. He seems to be congratulating Flores on getting this Giants head coaching job. But then it gets really awkward because Belichick brings up Buffalo. Brian Flores doesn't work for Buffalo. Another Brian worked for Buffalo, Brian Daboll. According to the lawsuit, Belichick then writes that he misread the text. He thinks they're naming Daboll instead. NBC News has reached out to and has not heard from Belichick or his team. And here's the deal. Flores still went on that interview with the Giants, right, knowing he wasn't going to get that job. The NFL, 2 hours after Flores dropped that suit, says diversity is at the core of everything they do, calling the claims without merit and defending their decision to hire Daboll. In a league that's only about 70% black, this is the backdrop. There's only one black head coach, Mike Tomlin of the Steelers. There are no black owners. Gabe Gutierrez sat down with Flores, who says he feels he's here to make a bigger impact on the league and on the sport. Watch.
And if we can make changes to this system, and give more opportunities to black and minority coaches, real opportunities, I think it'll be worth it.
Gabe Gutierrez is joining us now. Gabe, fascinating one-on-one with Brian Flores, who's been pretty open about how he felt humiliated, I think, in this moment interviewing for the Giants job, but still went on that interview out of like a sliver of hope, right? Being an eternal optimist, basically. There's been a lot of reaction from people around the league. One comes from somebody who plays for the Giants, this offensive lineman, Nate Solder, who's white, and says, B-Flow has always been a man of conviction and character. I am proud of him for risking so much and standing for truth and justice at great risk and cost to himself and his family. I got your back, Coach. Talk to me about this Flores interview and about what we're hearing from around the league.
Yeah, Hallie, what an incredibly awkward text conversation with Bill Belichick, right? I mean, Brian Flores told me he not only was humiliated, but he just sat there for about 15 minutes trying to figure out what to do next. As you mentioned, he did go on that interview with the Giants, but there has been just an outpouring of reaction, throughout the day today. As you mentioned, that tweet, other players and, colleagues of Brian Flores have come out in supporting him. But also there has been, several people that, including Eli Manning, a former player for the Giants, iconic player for the Giants, now in the front office. He says that he doesn't believe there was any wrongdoing here by the Giants, that there was no racial discrimination. But I also spoke with Flores' attorneys, who now say they are starting to get these calls from other players and staffers in the NFL who may want to join this class action lawsuit. So certainly this is far from over, Hallie.
There's also another really serious allegation that Flores makes here. He accuses Dolphins owner Stephen Ross of tampering, saying when he worked for the Dolphins, Ross offered him $100,000 for each game that he on purpose lost. This is like, what's the movie where this happens? The Cleveland movie, right? Anyways, this is like out of a movie. Ross denies it. The Dolphins deny it, right? The whole reason.
It's Major League.
Thank you.
Major. That's sorry. It was on the tip of my tongue.
You know I don't watch movies.
Major League. Charlie Sheen. I mean, come on.
Right. So this is the same principle, right? Tank a bunch of games, get a better draft pick. This is what Flores says. The Dolphins deny it. We have to say that, but. Yeah. This is very serious, explosive stuff.
Yeah, certainly. And there's a Ted Lasso theme, by the way. Another also plot point in Ted Lasso. However, yes, very serious allegation, Hallie. This is, in addition to the racial discrimination, there was this allegation of tampering. And he did expand on that in my interview. Basically, what happened was he said the Dolphins owner asked him to not work so hard, to take more of a vacation, and offered him, he alleges, $100,000 per loss in order to be able to get a better draft position. In addition to that, Hallie, there was another situation that Flores alleges happened where he was invited to lunch on a yacht with the Dolphins owner, and that he was asked to recruit a prominent quarterback from another team, which in Flores' estimation would have amounted to violating the league's tampering rules. He says he backed out of that lunch once he realized what was going on, but ever since that incident, according to Flores, his relationship with the Dolphins became strained. Now, we should point out the Dolphins have denied any allegation of racial discrimination, and they also say that any implication that they, acted against the integrity of the game is simply incorrect. That's according to the Dolphins, anyway. But Flores says it happened, and that is included in his lawsuit.
Gabe, we're going to be looking for more of your interview with Brian Flores coming up tonight on NBC Nightly News in just a little bit. Thank you, friend, for sharing it with us. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, 4 men have been arrested for the overdose death of Michael K. Williams, actor, star of The Wire, who died last year from fentanyl-laced heroin. We'll share more on how police track down those suspects in the local coming up. Plus, the restaurant industry is taking a beating. Think about it. Are you booking as many reservations as you did before the pandemic or even before Omicron? How business owners want Congress to step up and help now. Some 2 years into the pandemic now, a lot of restaurants are still having a really hard time, and the industry is asking Congress for some serious help. Maura Barrett has more in tonight's original in just a sec. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, 4 men have been arrested in connection to the death of Michael K. Williams. You might remember the actor died of a drug overdose in New York last September. Police say these men sold him heroin laced with fentanyl, and camera footage shows one of them selling Williams the drugs, according to police. All of them face conspiracy charges. From our West Coast Bureau, officials in California warn the state will probably face its 3rd dry year in a row because there wasn't much snow in January. It doesn't look like it's going to get much better anytime soon. California's already dealing with wildfire season, other water shortages, and drought conditions. And from our D.C. Bureau, after an 18-month pause while they figured out the rebranding, Washington's football team is stepping onto the field with a new name, the Washington Commanders. You might remember the football team dropped its prior name in 2020 because it's considered a slur against Native Americans. The club is keeping the color scheme, the burgundy and gold, while the team president says the new name suits the 90-year-old franchise. Hopefully, they will continue to have terrible luck against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, we want to bring you tonight's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. You know the restaurant industry. I don't have to tell you this. You know this. They've taken a real hit since the pandemic started. Problems with staffing, with people showing up, all sorts of things. And it's interesting because last year the U.S. economy grew at its fastest pace since 1984. But the Delta variant kept a lot of people home and out of restaurants. Now you've got Omicron that is just crushing them again. This week you saw reservations at restaurants dropping an average of 23% nationwide, according to data from OpenTable. You know, that restaurant reservation website. Now you've got some of these restaurant owners pleading with Congress, begging with Congress to do more to keep their restaurants from closing. Here's Maura Barrett.
5 minutes or 10 minutes?
When Diana Davila opened Mito Kaya, she had a vision for her restaurant.
We prize so much that feels like the flavors of our home that really, in large part, that the women have made. So really kind of showcasing those flavors in a very sort of mi casa es tu casa sort of a way.
3 years into the business, though, she was met with the pandemic, trying to stay afloat ever since, now coming up on the 5th anniversary.
We went from 25 employees to, at the end, it was 4 employees. I would love nothing more to have a place that's not just a flavor of the Mons, but hopefully be a staple in Chicago.
How could that hope become a reality? More money allocated towards the Restaurant Relief Fund, she says.
We have done everything the right way when you want that sort of American dream. It would be such a shame to lose, I don't want to say my business, I feel like our business of Mito Kaya, to see her go away because our government couldn't put something together.
2 years into the pandemic, restaurants still face a constant struggle due to the Omicron surge, the labor shortage, and cost increases, experts say.
Just last week, we had a series of calls with our community, and they're pretty much a breaking point. Right now, we need help from Congress. We need federal relief and state relief.
In 2021, lawmakers allocated $28.6 billion towards the Restaurant Revitalization Fund for struggling bars and restaurants. According to the Small Business Administration, more than 300,000 restaurants applied. About a third of those applicants received relief funding. This limited relief came after the first round of the Paycheck Protection Program in 2020, which allowed some big chains like Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse to benefit from the funds, even though the program was intended for small businesses. Shake Shack ultimately returned the $10 million it received after criticism. The selection process is unclear, but these rounds of funding left many smaller restaurants, like Mito Kaya, without aid money to keep going.
To go, right?
Yes.
Just 4 miles south in downtown Chicago, Gene and Giorgetti was one restaurant that did receive some aid.
So the original Gene and Giorgetti is actually right here.
But despite its 80-year history in the city, they're still uncertain about their future, urging Congress for more relief.
I think it is one of the biggest priorities that they should be looking at right now.
In January, the National Restaurant Association called on Congress to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, noting a survey of operators found 88% of restaurants saw indoor dining demand wane because of the Omicron variant. And 50% of restaurants who didn't receive the first round of funding of the grant feel it's unlikely they'll stay in business without bailout money. But there's been hesitation from Washington, D.C., the White House telling NBC News in part, "We are continuing to closely track the impacts of Omicron and will address if additional targeted relief is needed. But we are not in the same place we were last year."
Did I worry about not turning 80? Every day. Every single day. I still worry every day. You know, I'm third generation. Keeping this restaurant going it's a big responsibility.
Maura Barrett is joining us now. Maura, talk a little bit more about the hopes for this second round of basically bailout money, right? These restaurant owners, you heard it there, they really want to see this from the White House and Congress. But right now, you know, I live in Washington. There's a lot of other things that are on the White House and Congress's plate right now.
Exactly, and right now negotiations look to be at a stalemate in Congress. The National Restaurant Association basically asking for $48 billion added to this second round. They say that that would cover the nearly 200,000 restaurants whose applications are still pending for this fund because they never got any of that money. The association also saying that this would help save 1.6 million jobs. So that's a huge impact on a lot of American people, right, Hallie? And this is all coming to pressure, obviously not a huge priority for the White House. Congress is still having these conversations, even though there is a bill in the Senate. It just hasn't reached enough co-sponsors to bring it to a vote on the floor yet. But Congress does need to come to terms about a government spending bill by February 18th, and the industry is hoping that replenishment can be tied into that. Hallie.
Maura Barrett, thank you very much for bringing us tonight's original. Always good to see you. Coming up after the break, we'll talk a little bit more about the Biden White House making moves on a different front, maybe to look again at rules when it comes to TikTok and possibly some security risks that come with us. Jake Ward walks us through what that might mean for your scrolling addiction next. So the Biden administration may be changing the rules on whether and how much you can TikTok or not. We don't know what's definitely happening, but this is definitely under consideration because the Commerce Department just proposed a rule that could put more restrictions on Chinese and other foreign-owned apps. This thing hasn't passed yet, but it would let the government oversee and maybe even ban online activities on foreign apps that could have security risks. Of course, this happens. You know, everybody looks at TikTok since it's the most popular Chinese-owned app here in the U.S. TikTok has said all along, and listen, I've been covering this TikTok-China issue for years, and they have said all along they do not share user info from Americans with the Chinese government. But you've got some national security officials who have some problems with that whole thing. They say TikTok would have to comply with the Chinese government if China ever asked ever asked for data from U.S. consumers. Let me bring in Jake Ward here. Jake, TikTok is huge. It is a behemoth that had 1 billion active users every month last year. And yet there is this push-pull because people love it. People like it, clearly. National security officials are worried about it, and TikTok constantly is kind of pushing back on the China piece of this.
That's absolutely right. You know, Hallie, at this point, the Biden administration just seems to be trying to at least undo what was, at the time, a pretty legally dead-ended effort on the part of the Trump administration to simply wipe out TikTok specifically. That turned out to be more or less unenforceable in court. And so this seems to be a much broader and more, hopefully, in their view, legally strong case to basically regulate all foreign-based apps when they come into the country. You know, national security officials, as you say, are nervous about this thing. They basically believe that you could use the information that you and I give over every day to something like TikTok to track our movements, understand our social network. And that is why, of course, active duty military people are not allowed to use TikTok on their work devices. You know, there's all sorts of things in place. But this would actually open up an audit process. It would allow the government to look inside these companies. And that is the thing that the Commerce Department is now looking at as they close comments, public comments on this potential rule just today.
How much, from your assessment, from the experts that you talk to, what is the real threat risk here, right, that TikTok poses? Because, as I say, the company has said all along they house U.S. data from U.S. consumers in a different place. It's not in China, et cetera. They point to all these things that they do.
That's right. I mean, TikTok has said all along, its parent company ByteDance says, our servers are entirely in the United States. Our backup servers are in Singapore. Right. Both of those mean that we are independent from China when it comes to where our data is stored. But national security officials point out that any company doing business in China essentially is in partnership with the government and has to agree to turn over data if national security people in China ask for it. Now, separate from that, I mean, I think it's just worth us pointing out here, Hallie. I mean, if you were to go back and tell, you know, a security official in the 1950s that Americans are walking around every day turning over to private companies the incredible amount of information that we turn over to companies now. I mean, you cannot go anywhere in this
American
country today
companies, right? Platforms built in the U.S., Jake, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. All companies that have us doing anything on our phone essentially know where we are all the time and who we're hanging out with. I mean, you would have to have people in vans with headphones doing 48-hour shifts to try and get the kind of coverage that these companies have, right? So the idea here is that we don't, I guess, want foreign-owned companies having that kind of access to us. But it is interesting that, of course, there's an incredible amount of surveillance going on with American companies. It's the distinction there that the Biden administration seems to want to draw.
Jake Ward, it's a good point. Thank you very much for being with us on that. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for being with us for this hour. You know we're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.